Aaron, how many people do we have on the call today?
So we've got 100 registered. We'll probably see a slight drop off on that from registrations to actual people joining, but I'd expect probably between 70 or 80 to join.
Cool, thanks.
Do you have a sense what kind of companies they are?
So there'll be Make UK members in the large part, so manufacturing companies ranging between size, so you'll have sort of your small to medium sized enterprises, but also some of the larger manufacturers that we represent. And I'd probably say they span across all regions in the UK. So we'll probably even have a handful, probably not many of the Welsh companies, and then covering all regions of the UK.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start the webinar now. That will start allowing people to join, and then Hilary will then begin the introduction at 9:31, just to allow people to get into the webinar.
Good morning and welcome to today's trade event looking at exporting opportunities in Australia. Firstly, we'll hear from the Commission teams from both the UK and Australia, looking at the intrinsic links between our two countries. Speaking today will be Jennifer McKinley, Australia's Senior Trade Commissioner based here in London, and the UK's High Commissioner for Australia, Vicky Trudell, who's speaking to us today from Perth. We'll also hear from Make UK's equivalent trade body in Australia, AI Group, and Louise McGrath will look at the current landscape of manufacturing in Australia and map out growth areas of interest. Finally, the session will end with us learning firsthand from British companies which already successfully export to Australia, as well as their Australian counterparts, looking at the opportunities out there for market expansion. There'll be a short Q&A session after the presentations. However, just before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. All attendees are in listening mode only, and only the panelists' videos are visible. If you want to engage with the panelists or to ask a question, please do so by typing your question into the Q&A box in the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your screen. Aaron and I will moderate any questions during the Q&A session, which will follow the presentations. We're not going to use the chat function, so please use the Q&A to talk to us. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Make UK members area of our website afterwards. So with no further ado, please let me hand over to Jennifer McKinley. Thanks, Jennifer.
Audio, excuse me. Good morning and perhaps good evening to our audience, and a special welcome to Vicky Trudell, the British High Commissioner who's joining us today, and our esteemed guests. Thank you. Look, I'm really delighted to be collaborating with Make UK this morning to talk about opportunities that exist for trade between the UK and Australia. And firstly, I must start off by extending the apologies of High Commissioner Brandis for not being able to be with us today. You're stuck with me. High Commissioner Brandis has the visit of our Foreign Minister currently in the UK, so was unfortunately able to attend. But I'm very happy to speak to you this morning about the opportunities that exist for trade and investment between Australia and the UK, and in particular to hear from High Commissioner Vicky Treadell, the Australian Industry Group, of course, and companies from both the UK and Australia about their experience and their ambitions for further trade between our countries. Austrade is very proud to be working with two Australian companies, Movis, who has developed a unique AI-focused machine monitoring solution, and EnviroStream, who is Australia's only mixed battery recycling company. Thank you for joining us. My agency is the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, and we assist Australian businesses such as Movis and EnviroStream to enter the UK market, and also look to help them to see how they can partner with UK companies. On the other hand, Austrade also helps UK companies that are looking to invest in Australia to establish in Australia. And why do I say that? That's because many of you who are attending today are exporters, and we know from experience that sometimes export then develops into investment. Australia is the perfect hub for accessing Asia and leveraging our extensive suite of FTAs in the Asia Pacific region. So I hope this will be of interest to you. I'd also like to highlight Australia's advanced manufacturing, defence and space sector. In scientific engagement, especially in AI, advanced materials, robotics and UAVs. This is a sector where there are clearly synergies with the UK. It's a sector that exports currently 13 billion Australian dollars per year, employs 795,000 employees across 92,000 businesses. And Australia, as many of you will know, is also an important market for global defence and aerospace companies such as UK primes, such as BAE and Babcock, and others such as Airbus, Boeing, Thales, and some of whom I know will be members who are here today. And this spans services such as design, prototyping and testing. Sectors such as defence, premium food and drink, clean energy, particularly in relation to electric vehicles, and critical minerals are just some of the key areas where we think UK manufacturers can take advantage of supply chain opportunities and export to Australia and potentially invest. Similarly, as a significant and very important manufacturing nation, the UK can really add substantive value to Australia in the automotive, aerospace and pharmaceutical industries, just to name a few. I'd also just like to flag a recent Australian initiative that can be of interest to UK manufacturers. And this is the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. It was set up late last year, and it's a task force that is designed to help high value and high-end businesses and extraordinarily talented individuals to bring their talents to Australia. The task force is currently assisting some of the UK's most prestigious companies, including manufacturers, to establish or reinvest in Australia. And they're doing this by providing a very high-level concierge service, which helps UK investors to invest smoothly and successfully in Australia. Similarly, it's a service that looks to provide companies with assistance to help their leading executives set up in Australia with the company, or as I said earlier, help very talented individuals go out to Australia and further their careers. So in essence, Australia is really looking to deepen and build a closer trading partnership with the UK. And that brings me to the main trade instrument to meet that end, and that is the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement. As you know, both countries are working to conclude a high-quality agreement as quickly as possible, without, of course, compromising on quality or ambition. We have completed 4 rounds since negotiations were launched only on the 17th of June last year. And as many of you will have followed just recently, our Minister Dan Tehan was recently here in the UK to meet with Secretary of State for International Trade, Liz Truss, to further those talks and negotiations around the FTA. Good progress was made in London in key areas of importance to Australia, and that is in areas such as goods, services and investment market access, and also in mobility. Now, the ministers are calling a sprint to the June G7 summit for an in-principle announcement to be made by our Prime Ministers, which is extremely exciting. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, but Australia is seeking really concrete, commercially meaningful outcomes that deliver for our businesses, and most importantly, supports economic growth and jobs as we face the challenge of building back after and during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, this is a critical time of negotiations, and I am unable to go into detail about the substance of the discussions, but it's clear from the negotiation objectives published by both Australia and the UK that there really are wide-ranging potential benefits of an Australian-UK FTA, and particularly for the manufacturing sector. In relation to the manufacturing sector, in the FTA, Australia will seek to secure the elimination of tariffs and quotas for all goods and establish mechanisms that address non-tariff barriers to trade between Australia and the UK. We will build on our strengths in two-way services and investment and include modern best practice rules that facilitate trade across all sectors, such as digital trade. Some of these, such as removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, are clearly wins for the manufacturing sectors in both our countries. And I hope that we'll hear a little bit more about that this morning from the industry representatives who've joined us today. But the robust links between our economies means that improvements in the broader trade and investment ecosystem will be a real enabler for our producers to succeed and build further. You might not be aware that the UK is actually Australia's third largest services trading partner and second largest investment partner. So it gives you already an idea of the depth and potential of our relationship. So when it becomes easier for engineers to use their qualifications in both jurisdictions, the conditions for safeguarding intellectual property or moving data are more certain and investment flows more smoothly, then this will really help our respective manufacturers as well. We already have a number of bilateral initiatives that are underway to improve the broader ecosystem, and one of them is the Space Bridge, which was just announced this year in March. And it was really interesting to note that during a virtual tour by the High Commissioner to Scotland, where he spoke with Scottish enterprises, there was a lot of interest in the space sector and similarly in other sectors such as renewable energies. And it really is a reminder of the complementarities between our two economies, where the Australian sector is very hungry to leverage British expertise. We also welcome the UK's request to begin negotiations to join the CPTPP, a regional free trade area with a combined GDP worth £9 trillion. The regional nature of the CPTPP means business, exporters and consumers benefit from a common set of rules in CPTPP parties established on issues such as rules of origin, investment, intellectual property and e-commerce. The UK's interest affirms the significance of the CPTPP, its high standard of trade and investment rules and its commercial value. And this membership will also enhance the UK's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, with supporting our interests in working with partners to realise an open, inclusive and prosperous region. Our bilateral FTA negotiations remain Australia's priority, and this is a high-quality bilateral agreement which will provide a solid foundation for the UK's accession to the CPTPP. Just to conclude, look, we're very excited to see the UK embracing the spirit of free trade. This is what has really underpinned Australia's own economic success over the past 30 years. And our FTA should really embody that spirit. And beyond that, our FTA can really be a signal to the rest of the world of how Australia and the UK intend to recover and build back from the pandemic. As Minister Tian said, if I can quote him last week, continuing on with our trade liberalisation agenda freeing up markets is critically important to ensuring jobs and growth as we come out of the pandemic, because that's the way you produce jobs and economic growth in countries. So ultimately, in this and so many other ways, this free trade agreement is about a partnership between Australia and the UK, between our countries, peoples and businesses who already do so much together. And I think that the benefits for the manufacturing sector are just one really, really important piece in this vision. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Vicky Sheddle's having a little bit in the way of technical difficulties just now. She's been talking to us on the chat. So if it's okay with Louise McGrath, I'm sorry to do this to you without actually giving you any warning whatsoever. Oh, you are back. Hi, Vicky.
Yes.
Okay, right.
Sorry, I dropped out. So apologies for that. The line keeps coming and going. Thank you very much for including me. I heard a bit of what was said earlier, but I'd like to sort of complement that. To all the British companies online, apart from the support that was outlined by Austrade and the Trade Commissioner, of course, you have the whole of the sort of UK network here in Australia ready to support you, including our Department of International Trade team here in Australia. So we have offices in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. Of course, I'm calling from Perth, where I'm visiting our team here, and of course, our main High Commission in Canberra. But let me begin by first saying that with the free trade agreement, new opportunities, if we get the kind of trade agreement that has just been outlined to you, means that you should be looking at the Australian market. But beyond a trade agreement, I would argue that you should be looking to coming here. Many British companies have succeeded here. There is an appetite for British product across a full range of sectors. In 2019, total two-way trade between our countries accounted for £18 billion worth of trade. Of course, it all took a bit of a knock last year with COVID, but that was largely down to the drop in tourism and transport. But at the core of it are manufactured goods, whether in agriculture sector, food and beverage, various types of technology, supply chain into major infrastructure projects. You heard references just now to defence and security. Australia is keen to build up its own sovereign capability, but there are a number of huge projects underway here to re-equip the Australian armed services. So whether it is the future frigate that BAE Systems are constructing, or the replacement submarine that the French are producing, those are two massive projects, but supply chain opportunities into those. And I'm here in Perth, and we've been talking today about the transition of the economy here to a green, renewable future. So if you are in renewable energy in any form, there is a huge opportunity across Australia. What I would flag is that this is a federation. So apart from the Commonwealth government, you also have individual state governments who have their own procurement requirements, their own economic departments in their state governments who are looking to support British businesses who wish to do things in their particular state. And of course, for us, how we support British companies to gain even more of a market share of the opportunities here is absolutely fundamental to our work here in Australia. And it is something that I'm personally committed to. You know, how can we get more British companies to come out here? I think this is a great country to export to because there is a familiarity. English common law lies behind the legal system here. of course, the English language and long-standing history and affinity with Britain. If I look at people with British ancestry here in Australia, that's why I think there are particular opportunities for the food and beverage sector. In fact, recently I was tweeting about Eccles cakes and how popular they are here and on sale through a whole variety of specialist British food stores and the importers who are bringing in products like that. But equally, our car industry, Jaguar Land Rover, Bentley, Aston Martin, the Mini, even the Nissan Qashqai that is made in the UK, there are opportunities for vehicles. We're looking at the electrification of a lot of the public transport. So certainly, in the last month, the Australia Capital Territory announced that they will be replacing their fleet of buses with all electric buses. So the opportunity across renewables, electric vehicles, the whole infrastructure that would lie behind that, there are opportunity sectors. And in our Department of International Trade team, we have members of staff who are focused on particular sectors and how they support companies, because their job is to have the market knowledge and to help make the relevant connections. And this is against a backdrop of a very close and important bilateral relationship. Both our trade ministers met in London 2 weeks ago, as has already been mentioned, to actually help progress at a faster pace, but without compromising quality, our free trade agreement. We're in a sprint. Effectively, we've suspended the normal negotiating rounds, and every Friday for the next 5 weeks, Liz Truss and Dan Tehan, the minister here, will be reviewing progress and then tasking their chief negotiators to go away and try to finalize text across a range of FTA chapters that we are developing and agreeing. So the plan is to have an in-principle agreement by June, hopefully in time for the G7 summit when our two prime ministers will meet. So that's the ambition. But across Australia, it is a continental-sized country, 24 million people. The big urban metros of Sydney and Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth even, the sophisticated consumer who's looking for new product. I think there are opportunities to tap into across a range of sectors here. And we're really keen to engage with British business. And often for British companies, you may start, particularly in the food and beverage sector, by exporting your product. But I look at companies like Tyrrell's Crisps, who used to export packets of Tyrrell's Crisps made in the UK to get their market entry, to establish their brand in market. And they now manufacture at a wholly owned subsidiary of their company in Victoria. Campbell Soups as well, another famous British brand, has followed that path, exporting first and then establishing local manufacturing. So becoming an inward investor by making the product closer to the consumer. It's a classic route. Years ago, when I was the international trade director for what was then UK Trade and Investment in the northwest of England, working with companies in Cumbria, Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside and Cheshire, certainly a lot of our food and beverage businesses began the route to markets like Australia through physical exports, gaining a foothold, establishing their brand, and then whether they had a wholly owned subsidiary in market or they manufactured under license, really then getting their product into every supermarket shelf. So you can walk into Coles or Woolworths here, or indeed the Independent Grocers Association, which has a chain of supermarkets. And you can find British brands that are actually made here, but their journey to Australia began by exporting in the first instance. So whatever your route to market, with the support that Austrade offers, but also our teams, our Department of International Trade teams here, and your first port of call in the UK, certainly if you're in England, will be with your local international trade advisor, who can talk to you and help to signpost you and connect you with our team here. And if you're in Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, Scottish Development International, Invest Northern Ireland, and their sister body in Wales, we have both an SDI and an Invest Northern Ireland presence embedded in our teams in Sydney and Melbourne. So Britain is here in Australia waiting to support our British companies to come into this market. And we're trying to create the right environment to help land yet more British interests. So for example, a couple of months ago, I hosted an event which was the signing of an MOU between our two space agencies to look at how we develop the space sector together, to get British companies out here to realize the opportunities, but actually the partnerships that could equally be developed between UK and Australian capability as we look at the space sector opportunities globally. Whilst not in manufacturing, it follows the model that we established 18 months ago with a fintech bridge linking financial services, technology companies, and the sort of collaboration that is building up with very successful businesses, Australian going to the UK, British coming out here. Many of the major cities are reinvesting in their infrastructure, whether rail, airport, water. I've mentioned energy as part of the green transition. So if you are in those sectors or the supply chain into them, last Thursday, I met the Premier of New South Wales, who told me that right now there are more tunnels being drilled under Sydney than in any other city in the world. And indeed, they have used some of the expertise and knowledge from our experience with Crossrail in London. So I think those kind of infrastructure developments are ready and waiting to be realized here in the Australian market. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much to our High Commissioner to Australia, Vicky Treadell, and also to Jennifer McKinley, Australia's Senior Trade Commissioner, for that very insightful overview of the opportunities out there and the developing political landscape. So thank you both very much indeed. Very, very interesting. Now, if I can hand this time at the correct time to Louise McGrath, who is Head of Industry and Development Policy at Australia's trade body AI Group. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks very much. And I should say thank you very much for including AI Group in this. It's great to have an opportunity to speak with colleagues. But I should also warn you, I'm being very 2019 and have a standard garden variety cold, so my voice might run out if I'm not careful. But AI Group is Australia's largest national industry association. We've been around for over 140 years, working with manufacturers and supporting them. And there is a bit of a narrative sometimes when people think of Australia, because we are such an open and liberal economy, that there isn't any manufacturing left in Australia. But it's not true. Obviously, there's enough to support the AI Group, but we use the word manufacturing to describe all sorts of manufacturing, whether it's making a table or making a rocket. So obviously, different skills, different market needs, different technology used for those two spectrums. So if we look at the Australian economy in our manufacturing sector, sort of three broad categories. So the first category being low tech, low skilled such as making sort of bulk fasteners, T-shirts, those sorts of things. That sector, or that part of the sector, has certainly diminished over the years. This next sector is mid-tech, mid-skilled, which is traditional car assembly and the like. That hasn't died as much over the last 20 years, but obviously now the car companies have left, but we still manufacture a lot of buses, caravans, trucks, all sorts of things. So that mid-tech, still very important and an important supply chain partner for the last sector, which is high-tech, high-skilled, which is more at the space and rocket level, but also in defence, in food and beverage and medical devices. Now, those companies, their exports have actually doubled over the last 20 years. So rather than dying off, they've certainly expanded. And one of the reasons for that is our FTA footprint, which I'm just going to show you now. I'll share my screen successfully. And just, there we are. And just to reinforce some of the comments already made about the sectors in Australia that are growing. So this chart shows our PMI, which is our Performance and Manufacturing Index. So it's an index of confidence and expansionary behaviour of Australian manufacturers. And when it's above 50, that means companies are growing or expanding, or the sector's expanding. And the higher that number means the faster or the stronger they're expanding. So this month in April, we've got the highest level since 1992. And part of that is recovery from COVID, but it's also just shows the strength of the Australian economy and the manufacturing sector. So if we look at even the individual sectors, obviously food is over 60, machinery and equipment, building materials and TCF paper and printing, all really growing, but all sectors equally are above 50 and growing. And that's because of some of the things that have already been mentioned, our expansion in infrastructure, defence, and all our export opportunities. And to take advantage of the export opportunities, what's been really important for Australian manufacturers is to have a footprint of FTAs throughout the region, which is the fastest growing region in the world. So if I just explain our free trade agreements. So if we look first of all at ASEAN, which is, I suppose, the core of Asia, a lot of mid-sized economies, really booming, growing middle class. We have individual free trade agreements with Indonesia, with Thailand, Malaysia, and with Singapore. But some years ago, we actually signed a free trade agreement, a multilateral free trade agreement with all of ASEAN and New Zealand. So this means that inputs can come into Australia from across the region, but also, we can have a manufacturing facility in Malaysia using inputs from Australia, from Thailand, from Indonesia, and then going through Singapore as a trading hub. Subsequent to that, we've signed a free trade agreement with CPTPP, which has been mentioned, and I should explain the underlined countries are the bilateral free trade agreements. So if you're paying attention, you might look at Malaysia and see that we have a bilateral free trade agreement. We have a free trade agreement with them under the ASEAN FTA, and now we also have CPTPP. So one of the things that Australian companies do is look at what conditions are best for their goods for that trade. So if they're just sending goods between Malaysia and Australia, they would probably just use a bilateral Malaysian agreement. But if they wanted to use the ASEAN, use it as a kicking off point for ASEAN, they would use the ASEAN agreement. But if they were using inputs from Malaysia for exports to Canada, they would perhaps use CPTPP. And we also have a bilateral with Japan and Chile and Peru. And finally, to try to bring all the threads together, we recently signed up to RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which does include all of ASEAN, New Zealand, Japan, China, India, and South Korea. So you can start to see you know, when you think about perhaps your suppliers or your customers, these are the markets that are growing and that are providing the greatest market opportunities, but also are great supply partners as well, usually. And finally, Hong Kong and USA, very long-standing FTA, but now out of the CPTPP, unfortunately. And one of the things that we at AI Group really like about the prospect of a free trade agreement with the UK is that we think that the rules of origin that will apply will be modern rules of origin that are already used in these sorts of agreements. You know, supply chain partners, it's a bit difficult with over 40-day shipping. We're not a natural partner. You wouldn't necessarily ship something to the UK for slight modification to then go onto the world. We are actually ends of the line. So that's why it's really essential that when we have the free trade agreement, we have the rules of origin that support it. And in some of my discussions with UK companies and partners, I'm aware that the rules of origin that Australia uses in CPTPP and all our other agreements are a little different. So I thought I would just cover them. But just if you are interested in all those FTAs, this isn't our side, this is the government side, but this is what we recommend all our companies to use if they're importing or exporting for any of those FTAs, to understand what the right rules are, which is the most advantageous free tariff rate and rule of origin. So if you're thinking of setting up in Australia and how would you export to that region using those FTAs, this is the site to go to, and it's free. So these are the rules of origin that Australia is more accustomed to. So I know we're really getting into the weeds, but when you're manufacturing, these are the things that make or break a deal often. So in Australia, we have very generous change of tariff classification, or so this is an example of change of tariff subheading. So in this example, if you're making a pneumatic rotary type tool, HS code 8467, and you're getting inputs from perhaps Germany, ball bearings with an HS code of 8482, China, steel springs, Japan, motors of 8412, and you have changed all those HS codes into the new one, being 8467, this means it becomes of Australian origin and can be exported at perhaps duty-free or lesser duty to all those FTAs that I covered just before. The other rule of origin that we use is obviously regional value content. What's important on with this rule for countries like Australia and the UK, where it's not just the inputs or the products that are calculated in the final price, but also R&D, marketing, distribution, branding. And sometimes in rules of origin, they are missed. So this particular rule is where those elements can be captured. And in this case, most of our free trade agreements, most products, there are exceptions of course, have a 40% regional value content. So I'll just stop sharing my screen. So in conclusion, the opportunities in Australia, yes, are significant in particular sectors. As you can see, manufacturing is a vibrant, diverse sector within Australia, and certainly contact AI Group if you have any questions or would like any assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was really interesting and very helpful. I'm sure our companies will have found that very useful indeed. So we're going to hear now from some companies from sort of both sides of the divide, so to speak, Australian companies and UK companies. So we're going to start off talking to Brad Parsons, who's the Chief Executive and founder of Movis. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks very much, Hilary. Just a bit of background on myself and Movis. We're a 6-year-old business. In Louise's terminology, I guess we're a high-tech startup. We've really combined AI, IoT, big data, basically every buzzword you could possibly find, and we're applying the problem to the industrial space. I've got a brief presentation that kind of talks through, I guess, who we are and what we do. I might try and launch that. if I may. So share screen. There we go. Just making sure that everyone can see that quite clearly. Perfect, thank you. So I guess a bit about the motivation of why we're in business and what the problem we're trying to solve. When you look at the planet, industrial machines are actually one of the largest consumers of energy across the planet. But traditionally, industrial maintenance hasn't changed a great deal, certainly in the last couple of decades. When you add up all of the industrial machines on the planet, it basically comes to be about 2.3 billion electric motors. They use about 2/3 of the world's energy, or actually no, not 2/3, they use about 45% of the world's energy. And only about 3% of those machines are actively monitored. So we've come up with a combined service offering that is effectively industrial machine monitoring as a service, or machine monitoring as a service. So we've created a sensor product, a cloud and AI solution that effectively is able to predict machine failure in advance. So for manufacturers like yourselves, the cost of breakdown is enormous. The implications for safety and all the other elements around that are obviously significant. In today's manufacturing environment, downtime just needs to be avoided at all costs. Your competitors are not just local, they're global. So any insights or any advances you can get ahead of those is enormously valuable. So we've combined all these elements into a cloud-based interface. We currently have deployed the units in 14 countries around the world. In fact, we were exporting by the end of our first year in business, and we've continued to do that, and we've continued to grow. In 2019, pre-COVID, I think we grew about 400% in 1 year. So it was an enormous amount of flights on my behalf. The interface itself is actually quite simple, easy to engage. The reason why we've been able to grow into 14 countries quite successfully is they simply are shipped in a box. They're scanned. I'll show you one of these in a second. I have one on my desk. And the interface is a zero training interface. So a chemical plant, for example, here, this is one of our customers, is able to install these units in less than a day. So they're up and running and have got almost an insurance policy on their machines to know that they're not going to fail and advance warning when they do. The industries and the type of machines that we service, and as part of the incentive for working with the UK and UK businesses, is that you've got an enormous range of industries that are within the UK. Enormous amount of heavy industries as well, and that's where we spend most of our time in terms of customers. Having said that, I mentioned we heard earlier about Tyrrell's crisp manufacturing. Food and beverage is actually one of our biggest segments as well. We actually monitor about 60% of Australia's crisp manufacturing, which we're really proud of. And we've got customers such as Pepsi Cola, Kellogg's, Nestle, Fonterra, a big New Zealand brand. A lot of the big name brands are actually on our books. So I guess in terms of a bit of an overview, that was a very short and sharp introduction. I guess why are we interested in New Zealand? And I might just stop, why are we interested in the UK? I'll just stop sharing there. But the UK for us obviously represents a great deal of heavy industries, businesses like Liberty Group, Mr. Gupta, we're a customer of his, he's a customer of ours, and we service him out of the Australian business. At the start of 2019, pre-COVID, I was presenting at an InsurTech conference in London to a range of insurers. And since then, we've been actively engaging with the insurance companies out of London. We're actually about to launch in multiple markets with them. Obviously, the implications for our technology are broad and diverse. So, working with the financial strength of the UK market is obviously very beneficial to us, but also the heavy industries. We've been servicing the UK market for a number of years now, and we want to continue to expand that. Our Brisbane office services those 14 countries, but we're looking to establish offices, and we were planning to pre-COVID. In fact, I did 3 visits to the UK in 2019 alone with the aim of raising money and also securing clients and partners. The type of partnerships we're looking to bring on manufacturing. I'll just show you one of our units here. So we manufacture these at 2 facilities within Australia. We're looking to bring on a UK manufacturing. I think it was mentioned earlier, there's a 40-day shipping. So if we can manufacture them locally in country, then we're able to get them faster to clients. The other elements we're looking for is sort of research. We are specialists in what we do, obviously with artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, or sensor technology. That's where our specialty lies. But there's groups within the UK like Southampton Uni that actually have world-class capability in vibration analysis. So building research partnerships, building manufacturing partnerships, sales and distribution partners. We're bringing on a couple, as I said earlier, in the insurance groups. We see enormous potential in the UK and we'd love to have UK businesses to be working with further. I might just put a pause on that because I think I've talked really fast, Aaron. I don't know whether the opportunity is to open it up for questions, but I'd be happy to take them at this point.
I think what we're going to do actually is go through all the companies and then do a Q&A at the end with everybody, just so that we can get the right person answering the right question, if that's okay. Thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. If we can hand now to Adam Griffin, and I will leave him to introduce himself. He's Managing Director of Lithium Australia.
Thanks very much, Hilary. My name's actually Adrian Griffin, but that was pretty close.
I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Vicky mentioned a couple of interesting things and talked about the ties between Australia and the UK. You know, there's a bit more to it than shipping out convicts, of course, and the synergies between the countries. And it made me recall my travel plans of about 30 years ago when I used to go on QF7 or whatever it was 4 times a year from Perth to London. And you get off 5:30 in the morning, you wouldn't be feeling all that flash. You'd jump into a cab and the Cockney cab driver would turn around, stick the boots in you over the cricket or the rugby. They always had a choice, but there was something that they could criticise you over. And really, that was the free sports agreement. And it's surprising that it's taken the next 30 years for the rest of the population to realise there's more to it than that, and we actually need a free trade agreement. So it's good to see that that's coming along. I'll just share this screen with you, if I may, and tell you a little bit about our business and what we plan to do in the UK and what benefits we can offer to the UK. So Lithium Australia is a very diversified company, and really we've built our business around the battery metal cycle. We've got raw materials, we've got lithium chemicals, we've got a battery division which develops some of the best cathode powders in the world, I might add, in a little plant that we've got in Brisbane, exports those to China where we make commercial format cells for testing. But then at the end of it, and what I want to talk to you about today really is the recycling, and that's something that the world really needs. I think these couple of graphs point out pretty graphically what's going on. And on the left-hand side, you see the number of batteries that are coming into service. On the right-hand side, you see those coming out of service. There's a lag there of something like 8 years, but you'll notice that over a very short period of time, we're going from about 0 batteries available for recycling to about 2.5 million. Now, installed capacity outside China at the moment is less than 100,000 tonnes. So Houston, we have a problem. Now, what's it look like in the UK? UK is a fairly interesting case. Surprisingly, the UK only gets through about the same number of batteries as Australians do. I guess that means Australians are pretty wasteful, probably have a lot more portable gear. But this shows you, the previous graphs show you quite clearly that much of this is driven by the EV industry. So in the UK, we'll have a look at what's happening there with EVs, and you'll notice that not a lot of it available at the moment. The blue curve is the EVs coming into service, and the dotted line is those coming out of service. So what we've got to do is cater for this huge quantity of batteries that's going to come out of the system. So what's the opportunity in the UK? It's pretty interesting in that the spent batteries are currently exported. You know, Boris bumps his gums about developing a domestic battery industry. But what we do is charge the UK consumer to recycle and give the money to the French and the Belgians. Not a really bright idea. And that all revolves around a mature battery stewardship scheme that helps cover the cost of collecting and recycling those batteries. But one of the great things about the UK, and I always say to people, if you want to start a recycling business in the battery game, you need three things. You need plenty of spent batteries, you need a mature stewardship scheme that helps subsidise the cost of doing it, and you don't want competition. Now, surprisingly, in the UK, there is not one battery recycler. So this is an export business. What you've got to do is develop a domestic business, and you've got to build that infrastructure. We have infrastructure installed in Melbourne. We've been operating there for about 5 years, where we collect the batteries, we sort the batteries, shred them, and then having shredded them, we separate those components and we take out the scrap metal, the scrap steel, the copper, the aluminium, and then at the moment export the battery materials, the critical materials out of the battery, the nickel, cobalt, lithium, to South Korea for refining. The reason we're exporting that is because the Australian market is simply too small to justify the capital to put in that refining capacity. But as part and parcel of that, we've built a complete infrastructure chain, which includes containers to collect and specialised vehicles. All these things fireproof and compliant with all of the dangerous goods regulations. Incidentally, those dangerous goods regulations are pretty universal. They occur in most countries and also apply to international movement of these materials. Batteries are classified as dangerous goods. So there's the opportunity in the UK, plenty of batteries, a mature stewardship scheme, will cover part of the cost, no competition. And now that you're not part of the UK, really, you shouldn't be sending those things to France and Belgium. So what can we offer to the UK? An unparalleled partnership, and it really is unparalleled because there's no one else doing this in the UK at the moment. We've got exceptional experience in that we've been operating in Melbourne. We've got a current commercial plant, so we're not bolting training wheels on for the UK. We go in there fully fledged with all the tyres pumped up. We've got plenty of intellectual property that will really blitz the opposition, and that's most important because once you get into one of these businesses, you have to stay ahead. We can provide material offtake because we do all of that already. And interestingly, a direct path from those critical materials that we recover from the batteries through one of our other subsidiaries, VSPC, straight back into cathode materials, and we can regenerate those batteries. So that's what we're all about. We're looking for UK partners, and we will provide the partnerships that will create the circular economy in battery materials in the UK.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have to brush up on my reading skills. If we can hand over now to Phil York, who's Managing Director of PBSI Group.
I'll unmute myself before I try and attempt to talk. Thank you very much, and thank you, Adrian, for that that presentation there. Really, really interesting. Right, so I've got a little bit of introduction about P&B or PBSI Group, and I'll start there and I'll come off the slides I think halfway through, so I'll try and keep an eye on the watch as well, because it's quite a dry subject, so I feel I could lose a few people, but please do bear with me. It is quite interesting. So P&B, we're based in Manchester in the UK, and I'm trying to find the skip on. We manufacture some rather interesting bits of equipment, and these are referred to as switchgear, and more correctly, what we manufacture are circuit breakers. And these are best described or best thought of as very large light switches. A large light switch, for instance. And of course, they don't look like that in real life. I got the impression Brad would have an inkling, because there's a related connection to his customer base. So switchgears or circuit breakers look like that. They are fairly large bits of kit. They are rated to carry current, and as I said earlier, they operate very much as a large light switch. And these things exist all around the UK, all around Australia, and all around, unsurprisingly, the rest of the world. Anywhere we have an electrified system, which would apply to most countries, they will have switchgear, circuit breakers, and protection relays. And a protection relay is basically an intelligent fuse. And the two work together. So that's a shot of Richard and some protection relays. And protection relays and circuit breakers are really, as much as cables and transformers and transmission lines and power stations, very much the backbone of any country's electrical infrastructure. And we spend, or this equipment spends a lot of its life hidden behind closed doors. So people not in the industry rarely see it, rarely care about it, and pay no attention to it whatsoever. It works, it's reliable, and it gives us a bit of a false confidence that the world is hunky-dory. Unfortunately, in the UK, a lot of this stuff was put in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Of course, later on, we've got new equipment, but there is still a lot of old equipment that is powering our homes, buildings, schools, hospitals, industrial transformation processes, oil refineries, mining operations. And we spend a lot of our time trying to help clients modernize and address the challenges of obsolescence. So you can appreciate that equipment that was put in the 60s, it's quite unlikely that the original equipment manufacturer still exists. They may have been absorbed, pulled apart, stuck back together as somebody else, but in the most cases, they don't exist. And there's a lot of this equipment all around the world. And interestingly, in Australia, very, very similar to the UK. They were very, very closely linked. So these robust links that Jennifer described, or the commonality that Vicky described, very much applies to the description of the electrical infrastructure in both countries. Interestingly as well, when it doesn't work so good, it can go wrong quite catastrophically. And this was a coal-fired power station in the north of England on the Selby coal seam about 10 years ago, I think. So P&B, we're based in Manchester. We export a lot of our product. Almost 80% of what we manufacture here in Manchester is exported. And with a quick glance of the map, you will see there's some very large emissions. One is Europe, the second one is China, and the third one is North America. But everywhere else, we have representation. Now, that's not to say we don't have products in Canada or North America or China. We do, of course, but we don't have representation there. So we typically export about 80% of our turnover. We're turning over about 5 million UK pounds at the moment. We've been exporting since about 1946. So the company is about 90 years old. And from about day one, we were exporting this type of equipment. And we still do today. And the connection really for Australia is an extension of the older products that we supplied way back in the 40s and 50s. And the opportunity now is to replace them, because we are, like Australia, going through a real energy transformation. There is a lot to do. There's a lot of innovation happening, but we have got this odd paradox where we are under really quite tight regulation in the UK by Ofgem, which penalises faults like we saw earlier with the Ferrybridge station. So if a power station comes off the grid, it is very heavily penalty driven, and any customer interruptions or customer minutes lost are met with very, very severe penalties. And despite all of the innovation that we're doing in the UK and Australia and in other countries with battery technologies and the energy transition of wind generation and solar, it is ultimately piggybacked on very old equipment. So I'm just skipping through some of the shots of our production activity and our people. And it's this bit that's really important for us in Australia. So I'll come off the slide deck for the moment. And our relationship with Australia started many years ago, and it's evolved over a long time. But I would say it's not always been successful. We had a relationship approximately 10 years ago with an agent. So we find a company that would like to represent our products in Australia, and they have a huge portfolio of equivalent products, and we think these guys know what they're talking about, and sales remain pretty modest for 10 years. So we find a new agent this time in Victoria, in Melbourne, a family-owned business, and they have a very strong work ethic and enthusiasm to do good. And our sales are pretty modest for a few years, and then a lot of engagement, lots of visits, much like Adrian and Brad, being in country, being in front of customers, explaining similarities to what we've done in the UK power stations, to the choices and how Australia has, with a lot of the generation still very much pegged on coal as a fuel source, and not much appetite to see that continue, but not much eager to replace it with, and ways forward. And by being in front of customers and talking about what we do, we've developed sales now to £500,000, and we're looking at contracts this year of about £1 million. So now that represents something like 40% now of our turnover, so rather 25% of our turnover. So it's really quite a jump from very modest 1% of turnover to now Australia being a very, very important part of our export life cycle. And we're finding a lot of regulatory similarities. We're finding a lot of equipment similarities. A lot of the equipment in Queensland at Queensland Alumina, if I'm horribly name dropping some company names, at Glencore in the beautiful Mount Isa in the middle of Queensland, or Origin Energy, or Eraring. There are power stations and refiners and mining activities that have a lot of UK made equipment, and it puts us in a very good position to help those clients modernize and update and try and avoid some of the challenges with very, very old equipment. I had a lot of facts and figures about energy production in Australia contrasted to the UK, and I'm fearful that would really put everyone to sleep. So I will steer away from that very, very swiftly. And I would say that actually the agent route for us has worked very well. As you saw the map, we've got representation in many countries, largely focused in Southeast Asia. But we have had a few challenges with Australia. One, the shipping time, no less. Two, a ship trying to go sideways down the Suez Canal with our really important stuff behind it, which was not pleasing. And ultimately, that has meant that the receivables, the time we get paid for our stuff, take longer, and that is a problem. So putting stuff on ships and waiting for 90 days credit to get paid is a challenge. Trying to get credit insurance can be difficult, particularly when you've got a UK SME, a small family-owned agent, and then a huge multinational blue chip at the other end. And the insurance world seems to completely focus in on the agent and thinking, well, they're there's not much material substance to them, we won't back that. So a lot of this export activity, as I said, 80% of our turnover is all self-driven, self-funded, and support when it's available is very, very highly commendable and much needed. I think a lot of UK manufacturers, and it's probably true for Australian manufacturers as well, they're quite worried about that world of export and the risk that comes with it. And I think there is a lot more that could be done between the two agencies on today to help support the trading between our two nations, because for definite we do need it. And I think I will park there and hand back to Hilary.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was really, really interesting. So our final company today is EMS Physio, and we've got with us James Greenham, who is the Managing Director. If I can just hand over to you, James, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Hilary. I'm James Greenham, and as you've said, I'm Managing Director of EMS Physio. Just by way of background as to who we are, we're an SME, more towards the S rather than the M, and we manufacture medical equipment, specifically electrotherapy and physiotherapy equipment, here in Wantage, Oxfordshire, in our factory. We actually manufacture in the UK. We don't get it made outside of the UK and just badge it by importing it. We employ about 30 people. We've got a turnover of between £3 and £4 million a year. So we really are a small company. We're family owned. And in fact, today is our birthday. 97 years ago, my grandfather started the company, put a deposit in Barclays Bank, and here we are. We're celebrating today our 97th birthday. And I think we're going to have a small online party for staff later on today. So it's time to celebrate some good times. I don't have any slides to offer, so I feel a bit vulnerable because it's just me talking. But I'm going to take you on our journey of export, because we as a company, we export about 70% overseas. Our products are medical devices. They're things like ultrasound units, electrical stimulation units, shockwave units, which are used by physiotherapists. You may have experienced being treated with some of our products if you've had to go and see a physiotherapist because of a sports injury or post-operative recovery. And in fact, some of our equipment is starting to be used in some of the post-COVID recovery programs, which are being trialed in some of the clinics around the UK. So ultimately, our customers will be physiotherapists and clinicians, but we export through a network of distributors, independent companies who represent us in their particular country. And it's important not to overlook the skills that they can bring to that relationship. So what I'm going to talk about today is really to go on that exporting journey. And if you're attending this presentation with a view to, well, should I export my products and how do I export my products, then I'm going to take our experience of selling in Australia and apply it in a much broader exporting category of where on earth do you start if you want to export. Because if you make your product, we make it in the UK, but obviously whichever country you make it in, exporting is a fantastic way to increase your business. You're going into new markets which are receptive to your product, and it's a great way to grow the business and to spread the risk. So in some countries, the demand may be going down, and in other countries, demand will be increasing. So it's a good commercial decision to export. And what I want to say is that exporting is not hard. I think if you're listening to this thinking exporting is really difficult, there's lots of paperwork, there's lots of procedures that we've got to do. I can't export. I'm just going to stay in my domestic market. I just want to urge you to realize that exporting is not hard. Use the skills of those in the supply chain. We use a freight forwarder. We use a shipper. They're based about 10 miles from us, and they help and guide us where we need it. I mean, we're fairly experienced now, but where we need it, they will help and guide us to complete the paperwork that's needed to get our products from our factory in Wantage, and we can get them to Sydney, or we can get them to Vancouver, or we can get them to Ho Chi Minh City safely, correctly, and on time. And so don't overlook the importance of using the skills of other companies. So the first part of the journey, and our journey of selling to Australia, we sell through two distributors at the moment, and they sell on our behalf. They're independent companies. For us, the best way to start the exporting journey is to attend your industry trade show. For us, it's in the medical sector. There are several big key medical trade shows globally, but whichever sector you're in, you will know and understand the best trade shows to go to. And if you're not familiar with those trade shows, and you may have heard of them, but you don't know if they're any good, spend the first year just going there as a visitor, and to walk around, see the competition, see what everyone else is doing. And I know in COVID times, it's harder to do that. Well, it's impossible to do it, basically. So what I have to say is largely based on the hope and expectation that we will return to a sense of normality, and we all have to hope for that. But visiting and being at trade shows should not be underestimated. We've all been on enough Zoom calls over the last year to realize the value of electronic communication, but to be in a trade hall, to see your competitors, to see their products, and to have visitors from around the world come onto your stand and look at your products and say, I'm from Vietnam and I want to sell your products in Vietnam. It's a fantastic first step in the journey to exporting. So you visited the trade show, you think this is a good trade show for us to be at. Make the plans to attend as an exhibitor the following year, or the next time that the trade show is done. And for us, in our experience of Australia, we had sold in the 1980s through a distributor, and they've done quite well for us. The commercial arrangement had ceased by about the early 90s. But for us, Australia was a really good market to consider. It's got about, I think, 13,000 physiotherapists registered. There's obviously a strong affiliation with the UK. There's a strong cultural familiarity. A lot of the physiotherapists will have been trained, obviously under Australian regulations and requirements, but there is a strong link to the UK healthcare system in terms of treatments and practices and qualifications. The cultural familiarity of the language helps. It's a great place to do business where you both understand each other. You might not agree with each other on some of the sporting stuff, but you're speaking the same language. And for us, Australia is dominated by local Australian distributors. At the point of entry, there weren't many companies who were directly based in Australia and directly selling in Australia. So for us, you have to go back to about 2012. We had come out with a brand new product design. The the product more or less did the same thing. It delivered ultrasound, but we'd invested a huge amount of money in making the product look good, look contemporary. And that had a big impact when we attended our trade show in 2012. We got 2 distributors in mind from Australia. They used to come onto our stand every year. We had a chat with them. They'd say, "Yeah, nice to meet you. We're not really interested at the moment, but keep in touch." In 2012, we launched this fantastic new design. They both came on the stand and they both said, "Wow, that's a great new product for us. That can really sell. We want to be your distributor." And of course, by attending a trade show, you are already self-selecting your export contacts. There's one thing sitting in your office, wherever you are. For us, it's in Wantage. It's all very well for me to say, yes, well, I'm going to expand into Middle East countries or Eastern European countries, but it's really hard when you don't know which companies to contact. So if you can go to the trade shows, those companies from the Middle East or from Eastern Europe or from Australia will come to you. I know that sounds daft, but it's slightly reactive. You have to go with who wants to sell your products and where. So with us, with Australia, we were suddenly faced with 2 distributors who were more or less competing for our business and to be representatives. They were both based in Sydney. One based in North Sydney, one based in a town called Bowral, which is about an hour away. And of course, it's at that point that you begin the dance of mystery, if you like, whereby you have to start trusting them. It's all very well saying at a trade show, "We want to be your dealer," but then they have to put their money where their mouth is. They have to buy some demonstration equipment. And more importantly, they have to comply with the regulations of importing. Now, for us, with medical equipment, our products have to be registered with the Australian Therapeutic Goods Association. And our distributors were able to do that. They wanted to do that. And again, it's relying on the expertise of people who know what they're doing, who want to help you. So one of the distributors got us registered with the TGA. And it's at that point that you are able to start shipping product to sell into Australia. So they bought some demonstration equipment. They had got us approved for sale in Australia. And of course, you know, we're a UK company. We're not familiar. We're an SME. We're not familiar. We don't have the resources to understand how you can sell into Australia. But we had a distributor in Sydney who wanted to sell. So again, you're using the skills of another company. You have to discuss payment terms. And if they're not prepared to commit money or pay up front or pay by letter of credit or something like that, then the deal tends to fall apart. And we've dealt with many different distributors over the years who promised enormous amounts of business, but they never come up with the money. So you just don't do the business. It's terribly important to go and visit your distributor. And in 2014, both distributors were thrilled that I'd taken the time to travel to Australia to meet them, to meet their sales team, to meet their engineering team, to meet some of their customers. I was only there for about 4 days, but don't underestimate the value of personal contact, personal visits, even in the age of Zoom calls and FaceTime calls and so on. And that applies whether you're exporting to Australia, the Middle East, Asia, North America. You do ultimately have to visit them. And as soon as flights and COVID allows, it's important to step on that plane. And so for us, we had 2 distributors. They were buying stock and they were selling it onto their clinics all around Australia. We were using our freight forwarder to guide us on the best way of getting our product from the back of our factory door to the front of their warehouse in North Sydney, for instance. And that works very well. We have good, close relationships with them. Because there's been a personal visit, it means that emails and other correspondence when you've got to resolve a problem are more easily done when you understand the person you're dealing with. And we're continuing to do business in Australia, and it's great fun. Exporting is fantastic, and I'm just speaking to I'm speaking to delegates who are considering export as a way of growing their business, slightly fearful of what on earth is the first step to do, and how do you become an exporter? Well, I hope I've spent the last 5 minutes just covering the very brief basics of it. We export all around the world. It's great fun. We've got a great network. We call it a family of distributors. We all know each other, and we trust and get on with each other. It's fun. It's exciting. You get to travel internationally, and you meet people from all different cultures, including Australia, and it's great fun. And I urge you to take that first step towards exporting. And join us on that journey. It's great for everyone. Right, enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. That was really, really good. Okay, so quickly on to some questions, because we've got one or two here. This one, firstly, to the Australian companies on today's webinar. What did you find the most difficult when entering the UK market?
I think in our case, it's maturity of the market, because we're trying to enter into a market that doesn't exist. So it's taken a lot of preparation work, talking to authorities, talking to people in our case that do collect batteries and export batteries, almost not because they want to, but because it's a service to the community. And the fact that the stewardship scheme is there and they sign up for a quota, and they do it as a service. So no one in the UK has really looked at it from a point of view of creating a new product, genuinely recycling and establishing a new industry. And so that's been pretty difficult for many people to come to grips with. Fortunately, the companies that are collecting, to some extent, want to get rid of the burden of handling those batteries. So I think there's a terrific opening there for us. And as I've said, we're quite happy to partner with anyone that can provide us with the right advantages in that environment.
Thank you. Brad, did you have any sort of tips for anybody, or just...
Absolutely, Hilary. I've probably got the opposite to Adrian, where he might not have a market. I have got such an enormous market, from food and beverage, water utilities, manufacturers, the whole gamut. The difficulty for us is actually deciding where to focus, because we can't approach all markets at once. Sorry, all opportunities within the UK market at once. So ours is just really trying to decide where to focus and getting enough information about the different sectors, the challenges that they have. That's where the team at Austrade have been fantastic. I meet with them literally, we have a call Thursday evening my time with the UK Austrade team, and they're helping us to kind of navigate the market, understand who to talk to, the kind of challenges they have, and how we can help. So yeah, ours is trying to narrow so we can narrow our focus. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Next question I posed to the two UK companies. How did you go about identifying and then gaining access to the Australian market, and what were the barriers when entering the market?
Shall I go first?
Please.
By all means, James, yes.
Within the medical sector, within the rehab sector in Australia, there were several key players. It's not a big market. You know, rehab is it's a small industry. Let's put it like that. So we already knew one or two key players who were selling competing brands for us in Australia. And they were those people who came onto our stand at the trade show in Germany. And it happens in our industry. You get one distributor who represents a competing brand. They fall out for whatever reason. And they come to us and say, well, you know, we sell into clinics and hospitals, and we want to sell products that deliver ultrasound, for instance. So we want to sell yours. And with our experience, it was, and yours looks really great because you've got a new design. So in a way, they found us as well as we found them. You do have to put the legwork in to begin with by going to trade shows. And I know I obsess about going to trade shows. They shouldn't be overlooked in their importance. There's a lot of desk research you could do, but nothing beats seeing the companies up close and seeing what they do and interacting. So that's how they found us and we found them. And it was down to timing as well. And I can't remember the second half of the question. It was to do with overcoming the hurdles to get into the market. Was that right? Yeah. So for us, there are the main requirement for medical equipment is they have to be approved either with a CE mark within the European market, or they have to have FDA approval. Those are the two global regulatory standards. Without one of those, as a medical device manufacturer, you're a bit limited in where you can sell. So for us, we're CE marked because we have been part of the European Union up until January, and that allowed us an easier entry into the Australian market. Becoming registered with the Australian Therapeutic Goods Association was not that cumbersome. I don't like to say that too much because they might make the rules harder, but nonetheless, you do follow the regulations, and as long as you are registered and you have the regulatory approvals for CE marking, that was open. And in terms of tariffs, because we're in the medical sector, usually the tariff is zero, whether you have a free trade agreement or not. So it's quite convenient for us. Phil.
Thanks, James. I'll be quick, I think, with my answer on that. I think the barriers are confidence and timing. Nothing more than that. And it's often your own confidence. We found that with Australia. It was a lot of the overseas markets where we don't do great is we're not that engaged ourselves, and where we do better is where we are engaged and where we do have a deeper level of trust, and the agent has a little bit more latitude to make commercial decisions, and it's that split of responsibility, and that has to develop over time, and that rapport has to build to enable that trust to kind of exist there. From a material or equipment point of view, the use of whether it's UK equipment or German equipment or American equipment or Australian made equipment, they are quite homogeneous in one sense, and interchangeable. It comes down to customer preference, and there's an educational aspect. You have to put in time to convince customers that your product is better because of these reasons. And timing, my presentation was very much looking at old equipment that nobody really pays much attention to. Even the asset owner doesn't give it that much attention until something goes wrong, and then suddenly something has to be done urgently. And in our case, it's quite often this equipment's been in for 40 years, trouble-free, then there's a problem. Now we have to do something. So our sales window is horribly narrow, and we've got to hit that right. There's no other barrier, I think, to trade other than having confidence and finding customers for your product.
Thank you very much. I'll try to squeeze a quick one in for Jennifer and Vicky. If you could both answer this would be good. Where do you see the main opportunities for UK companies in the defence sector?
Who do you want to go first? Vicky, you're on mute.
Hopefully you can hear me now. As I mentioned when I spoke earlier, I think across the whole supply chain, for British companies in the defence and security industry sector, Australia is very focused on developing its own sovereign capability to bring in the technology, the partnerships that they need for the development of their own industry here. So some of our biggest players are already in the market. If you already have a relationship with Thales UK, BAE, you can name a number of them, then certainly explore route in as part of that supply chain. And of course, there are Australian companies looking for partnerships with British companies. So we have a fantastic defence and security equipment team here in Australia who work very hard. If you're serious about wanting to explore this option, certainly contact them. They will do their best to make it in this segment he's here.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yes, look, I don't have much to add, Hilary, but I would say that the Australian government last year announced $575 billion over the next 10 years in respect of defence. And 270 billion of that will be spent on defence capabilities. So we've got three main areas where defence focuses in terms of its budget spend, and that's on new capability. And then you've got the sustainment of existing capability, and then of course on workforce, and it's a similar structure here in the UK. And where, as the High Commissioner was saying, is where it's interesting is that we have a number of UK primes that are already very well integrated into Australia, such as BAE, Babcock and others, and even other European companies such as Thales, which have very important business units here in the UK. And if you have worked with those companies here in the UK, you already have credentials. And so it's really easy to go and have a conversation with the subsidiary in Australia of BAE, for example, to talk about supply chain opportunities with the Type 26 frigate, for example. The other thing is also one has to recognise that obviously a UK prime is going to be comfortable with its own exporters, with companies from its own country. There's a certain amount of trust. But where I would just go a little bit further is that in terms of defence projects in Australia, in order to be a supplier into the defence projects, you actually need to set up a company in Australia. And whilst some of you already might be a little bit daunted by the export journey, you shouldn't be daunted by the investment journey, because you can look at this defence project as one project amongst a bigger business case, and look at the other sectoral opportunities, because there are vast opportunities in Australia where we have this commonality, and there's a lot of opportunity. Excuse me. In that respect, when you're looking at Australia, not just in terms of export, but also in terms of investment, it's really important to be talking to the distributors, to the agents, to potential partners. They know the lie of the land, they know the landscape, they know the regulations, and they can save you a lot of time and headache. And then once you get to know them, and James and Brad and Phil have alluded to this, it's all about developing relationships and building trust, and finding where you have things in common and where you can actually work on new projects together. And so what we see is often the export play will develop into an investment play, but it will go even further. It will also look like R&D collaboration projects, where we've got two companies from the UK and Australia that are collaborating on really, really strategic projects. And once again, in the defence space, this is where it's really interesting, because we are Five Eyes countries. There's this mutual trust, and we have common objectives in terms of our defence programs. And so it's really important. It's a huge opportunity. Excuse me again. But what I would say is also, don't just look at the immediate defence opportunity, because that won't be enough to justify a business case. You need to look beyond that. And that's where DIT and Austrade, we can really help with that. So again, just if I might, I know I'm holding everyone up, but James was saying about the importance of attending trade shows. And that's really challenging at the moment. But that's where you can use this time to go and talk to DIT and to Austrade about, okay, who's who in the zoo, who are the contacts, who can I start talking to so I'm not losing time, and do all that preparation in advance of those trade shows that will hopefully come back soon. We're all missing the very big defence equipment shows, all that heavy material, but there is a lot of work to be done in terms of preparation before we head back to the shows and we start travelling again. So look, I hope that's useful.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We can share company details with MakeU members afterwards, and we'll try and find the best contacts at the various points of information to also share with our members. So we'll talk to you afterwards for that. Thank you to all of our speakers very much for today's time. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm sure all of us have gained a lot of information from this. So thank you again for taking the time to take part. In the coming months, we'll be looking at other markets, including Canada and the US, and holding similar events, and we'll keep you posted with further details. So thank you everybody again, and thank you to Make UK members for joining. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.